name's Sonya Smith. I am alongside of Manu, one of the organisers for Rocket Lab Monitor. So I've got whakapapa or kinship to rongo mai wahine, the iwi there, but I don't live in Mahia. I live in the village of Nuhaka, which is about 25 k's west of the launch site. But one of the things that has been a driver for me, I guess, is the number of community and cultural impacts that have not been fully acknowledged by Rocket Lab, the company, by our local council, our regional council, and also the trustees administering the land block that have the lease with the company. So, but tonight I do have Joe with me, so I'm going to be introducing Joe in a minute, who's going to talk about some of the consent components. So that's the consent with the Wairoa District Council, and that is because a lot of the questions that we get through the Rocket Lab Monitor Facebook page and the website is actually how is there legitimacy in a launch pad at Mahia? How did we arrive at this place? So I'm going to hand to Joe now, who's going to talk about the consents, and she's got a presentation here.
Kia ora koutou. I whakapapa back to rongo mai wahine, Tōhuru Marae. I live in Wairoa, but my whānau still live out at Mahia. I'm just sharing a little bit of information that a group of us have sort of put together. We contacted the Wairoa District Council under the Official Information Act and requested information around the resource consent process for Rocket Lab, especially how it applied to tangata whenua. So they sent quite a few documents. They sent the report on what made it non-notifiable, the actual application, and then the policies that they have at the council when they come to working with tangata whenua and Maori. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that and some of the anomalies that we found in it. I'll just move to the first page. So when I got the reports back, one that was non-notifiable, on the conclusion of it, I've just shared it with you now, but the bit that got me was the 5.1, which was, in my opinion, the adverse environmental effects of the proposed activity are no more than minor. So when I looked, that then led me on to go and look at what is the section 95AF of the Act, of the Resource Management Act. When I went further to have a look, this is why they made it non-notifiable and they didn't have to consent with us. This is the main one that I sort of had. I thought, okay, in 95F, it's talking about the meaning of the affected protected customary rights group. That was a concern for me because I wanted to know who this customary rights group was that would have had to have given a written approval for the activity or withdraw their approval before it could be made non-notifiable. So I started digging around a bit and asking around. Nobody seems, what they're trying to say now is that the hapu from Tawapata South have made their own group that could give that customary rights. But as far as I know, the customary rights group out at Mahia is the Mahia Māori Committee, where we have all our permit holders for customary fishing. So I'm still delving into that to see how they could set up their own customary rights group as Tawapata, as an incorporation. We just were talking to someone yesterday who told us that's what they did. I approached the Mahia Māori Committee and they didn't give anything in writing. Because for me, and for us, it's about how they made it non-notifiable so they didn't have to consult. So that's one thing that we're looking into, but we can't seem to find any written approval for it to be, for the consent to go through. Another thing is when we looked at the report, they had a Māori relationships manager, and in there it shows a direct quote. So that was questionable for us because there are many significant wahitapu areas within the catchment area that Rocket Lab have sectioned off when they have flights. One in particular is Waikawa, which is Portland Island. Waikawa is renowned for its whare and sacredness. When we look back into even the local song Roa Wharo, which has been around for decades, which was written by Tommy Todema, he talks about the sacredness of Waikawa. So, I mean, the Waiata that's sung nationally, they talk about it, but it wasn't recognised in this report. I know that there's another section in the resource management consent that talks about indigenous fauna. We have a special karingo that grows only at Waikawa, that all our nannies, my nanny used to send my brother out to go and get her the karingo each time it was ready. So we do have all of those sacred places and traditions that our kaumatua can't have access to anymore. So those are all things that were not identified by the Māori Relationships Manager as being significant to Māori or our cultural practices. In the resource consent, this was all that they had about tangata whenua, that they looked at it as only being the people at Unanui Station not around. They discussed about having several meetings at Tuahuru and Kaiuku Marae. We have since spoken to the trustees of both of those marae, and their marae were used as venues to meet. That did not mean that they consented or agreed to it. Rocket Lad put it down in their consultation process that that's who they consulted with, but actually the consultation was only held there as a venue. Neither of the trustees at that marae gave their consent to what Rocket Lab were doing. So that is a huge point that the council made in their letter to me, to say that there were several meetings at Tuahuru and Kaiuku Marae as a part of the consultation process. When I asked the council, their response was there was no consultation with tangata whenua, and that best I approached the agency, but actually they're the consent authority, so it's actually their responsibility to hold it, not mine, or it's not for me to go and ask Rocket Lab. They should be holding it because they gave the authority for the consent. So this was the only section that they had in the resource consent process about tangata whenua. Also in the report, when it came looking under section 8, which was in the Resource Management Consent Act, it talks about Te Treaty of Waitangi. They didn't identify any, and no matters relating to tangata whenua iwi had been identified. So as far as they were concerned, their Māori Relationships Officer didn't identify any of their cultural areas of significance for Māori, yet we go back to 2004, there was a coastal report where they talk about the whole of Mahia being a significant interest for cultural activities. One of the things that I think that we wanted to talk about tonight mainly was about, in the resource consent report and the decision to make it non-notifiable, Rocket Lab has to hold a complaints register. All complaints have to be registered with Rocket Lab, and that they will then forward it on to the council. So when I contacted, I'm just going to flip to the next sheet, because I contacted Morgan, who is their spokesperson or media person, and I asked her to advise me that I was wanting to write a written complaint, and could she please tell me where do I write this complaint to, because I wanted to lodge it, but also have evidence that it had been lodged. And her response was that she also didn't know how to go about lodging a complaint, and suggested that I contact the council. My response was that it was written in the resource consent report, and I suggested that maybe she read it. But it also brought to our attention that maybe she hasn't looked at it. There have been no complaints. If they haven't got any complaints written to them, she doesn't know that there's a complaint register, that the more people that register complaints with Rocket Lab, they have to document that was a part of a condition in the resource consent, that they hold this complaints register, and that the council be notified of how they are problem solving any complaints. So that's what I was hoping, that we were hoping tonight, that you would all, our goal is to try and get as many people from as many organisations, or just to write complaints to Rocket Lab so that they have got registered complaints, because all of those have to be a part of the paperwork that follows. What we do also know is that in the report it said that we have 8 years to make a complaint. From 2015 there was 8 years that anybody had to complain about it. We're still, the more we go through the document, the more inaccuracies that we see. So we're still writing up a letter and sharing it. But when we do, the letter will be going to Rocket Lab, the council, Stuart Nash, all CC'd together, so that we know that everybody's aware of exactly, if we send a letter to Rocket Lab, we want confirmation that it's been lodged, and to send that email back to us as proof that it has. So that's about what we wanted to share.
Thanks, Jo. So Jo's a member of Oranga Mai Wahine whānau. So that's a tangata whenua group from Mahia. So kia ora, Jo. Thank you.
Kia ora.